Imagine you're sitting across from someone on a first date, right? Your heart is pounding against your ribs, your palms are sweating, and you just feel this overwhelming rush of energy.
Yeah, that classic first date feeling.
Exactly. And every time they look at you, there's like a jolt. Society, movies, literally every song on the radio tells you, well, that's it. That's the spark. You found it. But biologically speaking, your nervous system might actually just be in a state of sheer panic.
It's honestly one of the greatest biological illusions we experience as humans.
Wow.
We take that sweaty palm panic, we wrap it up in a bow, and call it romance. And, we do it because we lack the vocabulary to differentiate between what is actually happening in our bodies and what we hope is happening in our futures.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. So, welcome. If you've ever found yourself hopelessly confused by, well, the language of love and relationships, you are absolutely not alone.
No, definitely not. It's a universal struggle.
Right. I mean, we casually throw around phrases like, oh, I'm attracted to them, or we have great chemistry, or I feel this deep connection, as if they just mean the exact same thing. But our sources today show they aren't. They are three highly distinct experiences with entirely different biological and emotional engines.
And when you lump them together, you're not just making a linguistic mistake. You're genuinely setting yourself up for profound heartbreak.
Yeah, which nobody wants.
Right. The human brain actually loves to blur these lines. It wants to take the easiest, fastest route to a conclusion.
Yeah.
So if you feel good in the moment, your brain just tells you, yep, you have found everything you ever need.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to deconstruct attraction, chemistry, and connection. We're going to look at the neurochemistry behind them and basically give you a practical toolkit to actually evaluate your own relationships, whether you're single, dating, or have been married for 20 years. But to untangle this, we first have to understand why we confuse these concepts in the first place. And it basically comes down to a perfect storm of timing and brain chemistry.
Yes. The confusion happens because at the very beginning of a new romance, all these feelings tend to arrive simultaneously.
Right.
Think about it. You meet someone new, you find them physically appealing, the conversation flows effortlessly, you're laughing, and your heart races when their name pops up on your phone.
Oh, totally. We've all been there.
Because all of those physical and emotional cues hit you at the exact same time, your brain naturally assumes it is one big unified experience. It doesn't separate the physical appeal from the witty banter.
And psychologists actually refer to this process as idealization, right? Like, you are highly stimulated and excited, so your brain just starts automatically filling in the gaps of who this person actually is with, well, imagined positive qualities.
Oh, absolutely.
You aren't actually observing them yet. You're projecting a fantasy onto them based on just a handful of interactions.
And the biology driving that projection is incredibly potent. I mean, when you are in those early stages, your brain is flooded with a very specific cocktail of neurochemicals.
So what's in the cocktail?
First, you have dopamine. That is your motivation and reward neurotransmitter. It creates that intense anticipation.
Like when you literally can't stop checking your phone.
Exactly. It's the reason you're glued to the screen.
Yeah.
Then you have norepinephrine, which is essentially an adrenaline equivalent.
Okay.
It spikes your alertness and energy. It's why you feel hyper-focused on them and why you feel maybe a little nervous or on edge. And finally, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, starts trickling in, which promotes a feeling of emotional closeness.
I mean, it's like trying to taste the individual ingredients in a smoothie while riding a roller coaster.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
So you have motivation, panic, and bonding all hitting your system at once. It makes perfect sense why we draw these massive permanent conclusions from what are basically temporary chemical states. I mean, the dopamine is screaming, "This is the one," before you even know their middle name.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that the emotions you feel are completely genuine. Your heart really is racing. You really are happy.
Right.
But the conclusions your brain draws from those emotions are often entirely inaccurate. Hollywood calls it love at first sight, but biology calls it a temporary neurochemical rush.
So if our brain chemicals are just blurring everything together, let's start pulling the pieces apart. Let's isolate the very first ingredient, which is attraction.
Okay, let's do it.
To use a functional analogy from the research, attraction is essentially the billboard on the side of the highway. It is designed to grab your attention and get you to pull off the road, but it is not the actual restaurant.
I love that analogy. Attraction is simply the initial pull. It's the feeling of being drawn toward another person because something about them captures your interest.
Yeah.
And yes, Obviously, physical attraction is the most obvious billboard, right? Great smile, a confident posture, striking eyes. But the data consistently points to attraction being a multi-layered experience. It's rarely based on physical geometry alone.
Right, because, I mean, we've all met someone who is conventionally stunning, but within like 5 minutes of talking to them, the attraction completely evaporates. It just disappears.
Exactly, because you quickly realize the other layers of attraction are missing. Psychologists identify several forms. There is emotional attraction, where you're drawn to how safe and understood they make you feel.
Which is huge.
Definitely. Then there's intellectual attraction, where you're just fascinated by their mind, their curiosity, or how they solve problems. There's shared values attraction, where you're drawn to the fact that they view the world and what matters in it the exact same way you do.
And crucially, there's behavioral attraction. This is when you are drawn to acts of kindness, patience, reliability, and, emotional maturity.
And that is actually the form of attraction that sustains a long-term partnership. Research consistently shows that behavioral characteristics are the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction.
Makes sense.
A beautiful face will change over time. But if you are highly attracted to someone's emotional resilience, like how they handle stress or how they treat strangers, that attractive behavior will outlast their physical appearance by decades.
Which honestly brings me to a major pushback against how we date today. I mean, we are completely obsessed with the physical billboard. We swipe on apps based entirely on a two-dimensional image.
We really do.
But if attraction is just the invitation to the relationship, isn't focusing only on physical looks, a bit like staring at the envelope and never actually going to the party. Like, you pull into the parking lot, stare at the neon sign, and just sit in your car forever. You never go inside to see if the food is any good.
That is exactly what happens. Physical attraction does not tell you if you are emotionally compatible. It doesn't tell you if they can handle conflict or if you have shared goals.
Right.
It only tells you that you want to ask them a question. It's the invitation to explore, not the destination itself.
So let's say you pull off the highway. You accept the invitation. You sit down across from them and you start interacting. The dynamic energy that bounces between the two of you in that space, that is chemistry.
Yes. Chemistry is what happens between two people. It's not something you possess individually, it's something you co-create. To build on your analogy, if attraction is the billboard, chemistry is the weather.
Oh, I like that.
It is the energetic atmosphere you create together. It's the shared humor, the effortless banter, those comfortable silences. When you have chemistry with someone, your brain's reward system just lights up.
So that's the dopamine again.
Exactly. You get a surge of that dopamine we mentioned, which makes you feel energized, witty, and motivated to just keep interacting.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because that dopamine rush, it doesn't only trigger when things are going perfectly. There is a massive trap here. Chemistry isn't always a magical, cosmic alignment of two souls. Sometimes what we call chemistry is actually just our nervous system reacting to unpredictability.
This is perhaps the most crucial distinction anyone navigating relationships needs to understand. It all comes down to a psychological concept called intermittent reinforcement.
Intermittent reinforcement. Okay.
Yeah, think about how a slot machine works. If a slot machine paid out $1 every single time you pulled the lever, you'd eventually get bored. It's predictable.
Right, there's no thrill.
But because a slot machine pays out unpredictably, like you never know if you're going to get nothing, a little or a jackpot, your dopamine system goes into overdrive trying to anticipate the reward.
And we do the exact same thing with romantic partners.
We really do. If you are dating someone who sends you mixed signals, say they are warm, affectionate, and totally focused on you on Friday, but by Monday they're distant, cold, and taking 12 hours to text back.
Ah, the worst.
It is. And your brain treats them like a slot machine. The unpredictability spikes your dopamine and norepinephrine.
Wait, I really want to make sure I am grasping this. You're telling me that those intense, fiery, romantic butterflies that we are all conditioned to chase, they might literally just be my nervous system panicking because of uncertainty. That my anxiety over whether they actually like me is mimicking a romantic spark.
In a vast majority of cases, absolutely. Your heart beats faster, your palms sweat, you can't stop thinking about them. It feels incredibly intense and exciting. But you are confusing emotional intensity with emotional health.
Oh, wow.
The anxiety of not knowing where you stand creates a massive chemical high when they finally do give you validation. We mistake the relief of our anxiety for love.
That's crazy.
True chemistry, healthy chemistry, should enhance your emotional well-being. It should make you feel
Yeah.
energized and inspired. It should never replace your peace of mind with a destructive emotional roller coaster.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. We are out here mistaking an activated fight or flight response for a soulmate connection. Okay, but let's say the chemistry is healthy. It's a sunny day, not a tornado. The initial fire and excitement eventually have to settle into a steady bond. And that brings us to the third piece of the puzzle: genuine connection.
Right. If attraction is the billboard and chemistry is the weather, connection is the foundation of the house. It's buried in the dirt.
Digging into the dirt now.
Exactly. It isn't particularly sexy or thrilling to look at, but it is the only reason the house doesn't collapse when a storm hits. Unlike attraction, which takes less than a second to register, or chemistry, which can be established in a single 2-hour date, connection takes time.
You can't rush it.
True connection cannot be rushed and it cannot be faked.
And psychologists measure this in terms of making small deposits into the emotional bank account of a relationship. Hollywood tells us connection is, running through the airport to stop their plane.
Right, the grand gesture.
But psychology tells us connection is actually just everyday moments. It's remembering how they take their coffee. It's putting your phone down when they walk into the room. It's listening to them vent about their boss without immediately trying to fix the problem. Hundreds of thousands of these tiny, seemingly insignificant interactions are what actually build an extraordinary sense of emotional safety.
And the bedrock of that emotional safety is shared values. People very often confuse shared interests with shared values.
Oh, that's a good
They
point.
think, oh, we both love rock climbing and vintage foreign films. We are so connected. But interests are just hobbies. They dictate how you spend your Saturday afternoons. Values dictate how you spend your life.
Exactly. I mean, you don't need to like the same movies, but if you have fundamentally different beliefs about what constitutes financial responsibility or how to raise children or what loyalty looks like, well, no amount of shared rock climbing is going to save you.
Shared interests create fun weekends. Shared values create lasting stability. Connection is categorized by a profound feeling of peace. It's the deep grounding knowledge of, I can be my completely authentic, flawed self around this person, and I will not be abandoned or judged.
Look, I have to be honest here. I want to push back a little on behalf of the listener because when you describe connection as peaceful, steady, and built on predictable routines like, sharing breakfast, part of me hears that and thinks, that sounds incredibly boring.
I get that.
If we trade the fireworks of chemistry for the predictability of connection, aren't we just settling? Are we just giving up on passion?
It is such a common fear, and it is usually rooted in what we discussed earlier about the slot machine effect.
Yeah.
If your nervous system has been conditioned, either by past trauma, chaotic childhood environments, or just years of toxic dating, to equate anxiety with love, then a healthy, peaceful relationship is going to feel boring to you. Your brain is waiting for the adrenaline spike of a crisis. When the crisis never comes, you interpret that safety as a lack of passion.
Wow. So peace feels like boredom only because we're addicted to the chaos?
Exactly. And furthermore, connection does not mean an absence of conflict or excitement. A deeply connected couple still argues. They still face massive frustrations.
Of course.
The difference is how they handle the friction.
Hmm.
A connected couple has emotional safety during conflict. They don't resort to name-calling. They don't threaten to leave every time it gets hard.
Right.
They don't try to win the argument at the expense of their partner. They try to understand each other and repair the misunderstanding as a team. That kind of resilience isn't boring. It is incredibly intimate.
Okay, so now that we've pulled these three concepts apart, attraction, chemistry, and connection, we can see exactly why modern relationships can feel so baffling, because these three elements rarely show up at the exact same time in equal measure.
The clinical framework often uses a three-legged stool analogy to explain this. A healthy, long-lasting romantic relationship requires all three legs to remain stable over the long haul.
Right.
But in the real world, you frequently encounter scenarios where a leg is missing.
Let's walk through those. The first one is attraction without chemistry. We have all lived this. You meet someone who looks amazing on paper. They are gorgeous. They have a great job. They check every single box.
Yep.
But when you sit down for drinks, the energy is just dead. The conversation feels like pulling teeth. The silences were agonizing. And no matter how much you want to like them, there is zero spark.
Then you have the opposite scenario, connection without immediate attraction. This is the classic friends first scenario.
Sure.
When you first met, there were no fireworks. You didn't feel that dopamine rush. But over months or years of being in the same social circle, as trust and emotional safety deepened, you began to see them differently. You started to rely on their humor and their steadfastness, and suddenly, almost out of nowhere, deep attraction grew out of the fertile soil of that connection.
And then there's the most dangerous combination of all. Chemistry without connection. This is the intense, toxic firework. The physical spark is blinding. You lose track of time when you are together. But the communication is inconsistent, the arguments are explosive, and trust is just completely non-existent. So what does this all mean? If you have to build a stool with legs of varying lengths, which leg is the most dangerous to rely on exclusively?
Relying exclusively on chemistry is, without a doubt, the most destructive.
Yeah.
If you become addicted to the intense highs and lows, believing that true love must always feel like a breathless rush, you will inevitably overlook massive, glaring incompatibilities.
Yeah, you put on the blinders.
You will stay in situations that lack foundational trust simply because you're chasing the next dopamine hit. Chemistry might make the relationship thrilling, but connection is the only leg that can actually bear the weight of real life.
Which naturally leads us to the ultimate question for you, the listener. How do you practically use this knowledge? How do you evaluate if a relationship actually has the structural integrity to last?
Decades of psychological data point us toward a few highly reliable indicators. One of the most critical frameworks to understand is attachment theory.
A huge topic.
Very huge.
Yeah.
The way you bonded with your primary caregivers as an infant and toddler forms a subconscious blueprint for how you relate to romantic partners as an adult. Psychologists broadly identify four main styles. There is secure attachment, where you are comfortable with intimacy, but also comfortable with independence.
Which is the goal, obviously. But a lot of us don't start there.
Right. Then there is anxious attachment, where you are constantly terrified of abandonment and require high levels of validation.
Yeah.
Opposing that is avoidant attachment, where emotional closeness actually triggers a feeling of being suffocated, so you instinctively pull away when things get intimate. And finally, fearful avoidant, which is a chaotic mix of desperately wanting love but being terrified of it once you get it.
And these styles create predictable, often destructive loops, don't they? Especially the anxious avoidant trap. I mean, I know so many people who've been stuck in that.
It is the most common toxic dynamic in dating. An anxious person whose core wound is a fear of abandonment is subconsciously drawn to an avoidant person whose core wound is a fear of engulfment.
The perfect storm.
Exactly. The anxious person pushes for closeness, which triggers the avoidant person to pull away. The avoidance withdrawal then triggers the anxious person's deepest panic, causing them to pursue even harder. It creates massive emotional intensity, a massive dopamine roller coaster, which they both mistake for deep, passionate chemistry.
When really it's
Just two unhealed childhood wounds triggering each other.
the good news from our sources is that these attachment styles are not life sentences. Through self-awareness, therapy, and conscious effort, you can move toward an earned secure attachment. And developing that secure baseline is what allows you to accurately identify red flags versus green flags.
Exactly. A red flag is not just a disagreement over where to eat. It is a predictable pattern of harmful behavior. It's constant criticism, stonewalling during conflict, a refusal to take accountability, or employing that intermittent reinforcement we talked about.
Right.
Green flags, conversely, are consistency. It is a partner whose words and actions align perfectly over a long period of time.
But there is a tricky element here that psychologists call intuition. We hear all the time, trust your gut. But intuition isn't a magical sixth sense. It's actually a neurological mechanism.
Yes.
The amygdala, the fear center of your brain, processes threats incredibly fast, much faster than your prefrontal cortex, the logical center, can process language. So you get a bad vibe because your amygdala recognized that their body language didn't match their words even before your conscious mind figured it out.
Yes. State-dependent memory and subconscious pattern recognition play a huge role here. Your body remembers past betrayals and sends you a physical warning signal before your brain can articulate why.
But this brings up a massive practical dilemma. If I have an anxious attachment style, how do you distinguish between genuine intuition whispering a valid warning about a red flag and just your own personal insecurities acting up? Like, how do I know if my gut is right or if my trauma is just projecting?
It is a vital distinction, and the rule to follow from the text is this. Intuition must always be balanced with observable evidence.
Okay.
If you feel a sudden twisting pang of anxiety on a Tuesday night because they haven't texted back in 2 hours, don't instantly treat that emotion as proof that they are cheating or leaving you. Pause and ask your logical prefrontal cortex. What observable behaviors am I actually seeing in this relationship?
So you demand data from yourself.
Precisely. If your partner is historically consistent, reliable, communicative, and respectful, that sudden anxiety is likely just your own internal fear of vulnerability flaring up. It is an echo of the past, not a reflection of the present.
That makes total sense.
However, if your uneasy gut feeling is backed up by a consistent pattern of them canceling plans, lying about small things, or dismissing your feelings when you bring them up, well, that is your intuition recognizing a real present danger. You have to balance the immediate physiological response with a long-term assessment of their actual behavior.
You balance the gut feeling with the data. I love that. So to bring this entire journey full circle, the biggest takeaway here is that love is not just a passive emotion we stumble upon, just hoping the stars align. It is an architecture we actively build. As one of the psychologists we researched beautifully summarized it, attraction may open the door, chemistry may invite you inside, but genuine connection is what makes you want to stay.
And a non-negotiable part of wanting to stay is that a healthy connection always allows you to maintain your individual identity. Real emotional safety never requires you to lose yourself, shrink your ambitions, or walk on eggshells to keep the peace.
Never.
The healthiest relationships create an environment where both individuals can grow side by side, remaining curious about each other as they evolve over the years.
So think back to that murky, confusing language of love we talked about at the very beginning. Once you separate the initial rush of attraction, the chaotic weather of chemistry, and the quiet, unshakable foundation of connection, the entire landscape becomes so much clearer. And it leaves you with a final, lingering thought. If the strongest connections are built on emotional safety and an environment where both people can truly thrive, well, perhaps the best way to evaluate the health of your relationship isn't by intensely analyzing your partner's every move. Instead, maybe the truest test is to simply look in the mirror and ask, who am I becoming when I'm with you?